friends, it's Lisa and welcome to my summer wrap-up. So I didn't do a reading wrap-up back in July because I only read a couple of things and like half of the things I did read were rereads. So I figured it'd be kind of silly to do that. So I just decided to wait and do kind of a summer wrap-up. So we're going to be chatting about all of the things I read in July and August. I think I have 15 things to talk about. I definitely made up for my lack of reading in July in August, which was great. And also, if I sound congested, I am sick. So apologies about that. I'm also going to say this now because I know it is very annoying when people are constantly plugging their different videos and things throughout videos. So I'm just going to say this now. I did a ton of vlogs over the summer where most of these vlogs, if not all of them, were featured in various vlogs. So I'm just going to have it all linked down below. If there's anything specific you're looking for, it will be linked there if you want to know more in-depth thoughts or just see my like real in-time kind of thoughts on these books. But yeah, I'm going to try not to, plug all the various vlogs that I did in the past couple of months throughout this whole video. But yeah, I think we can just get into it and start chatting about the 15 books I read this summer. All right, we're going to jump back to July. The first things that I started reading this summer, also like it has been 2 months since I've read some of these books, and also I have sick brain right now. So this wrap-up is going to be probably a bit of a mess, but like I feel like that's just all of my wrap-ups anyways. But the first thing that I read back in the beginning of July was Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong. This is the sequel to These Violent Delights and also the conclusion to this specific duology. And obviously I don't want to say what this book is about, but in this series you have these characters, Romeo and Juliet, and it is a Romeo and Juliet like retelling inspired sort of story, and it's set in Shanghai in the 1920s. And Romeo and Juliet are a part of these rival gangs, but despite being a part of these rival gangs, these weird, mysterious murders start happening, and it is happening on both sides. There are people from both gangs that are being murdered, so Romeo and Juliet decide to kind of team up and try to figure out what is happening in their city and to their people, and it gets very complicated because the two of them actually had this romance that occurred between them like a couple years prior to this, so they haven't seen each other since then. There's a lot of angst, a lot of tension, but they're trying to kind of put that aside to work together, but obviously there's still feelings involved, so it's just really fun. They also have some really great friends and like side characters in this series that also have their own like romances and other storylines happening, and I just really enjoyed this duology. I ended up giving Our Violent Ends 4.5 stars. I definitely feel like this is the type of duology, and especially this book, where you really have to care about the characters and the relationships and the romance to really enjoy it. I kind of forgot how much I liked the characters and the different relationships and everything until I started this book, because I read These Violent Delights, I think it was back in 2021, so it had been, a couple years since I had read it, and I went into this book being like, I don't know if I'm still going to love this as much as I did when I read the first book. Like, do I still care about these characters? Do I care about everything still? But within like the first chapter, I was like, oh, we're so back. I love them. I love the angst. I love the drama. I love the tension. And so it was really fun to be back with them. But I definitely feel like the relationships and the like romances and just the tension between the different characters is really what is driving this particular book forward. There is a bit of a plot, and like I said, this is the conclusion to this duology. So there is a plot still, and it is interesting, but I feel like the characters and the relationships is really the focus of this book especially. I definitely think I preferred the plot of These Violent Delights, but I still really enjoyed this, and like I said, I do care about the characters. I really love the characters, and I also am just more of a character-driven reader to begin with, so for me this really works, but I could see this not working for everybody. I don't know if any of that made sense. This wrap-up is going to be such a mess. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I love the characters. I love Romeo and Juliet. I love their like relationship and all of the angst and tension, and there were just so many moments where I was like, it's so like angsty, and the like tension between them is so good. Yeah, I don't know. I just loved reading about them. I also love Marshall and Benedict, who are some of the side characters and some of the friends, and their like storyline kind of within this book I also really enjoyed. I mean, it stressed me out and was very, very like tension filled. If Chloe Gong can do anything, it's write tension, so which I love. I love the angst, so it really works for me. There was definitely a lot of that happening in this book, but it made like my investment in the characters and the relationships even more there. Did that make sense? I don't know. it made me more invested in the characters and the relationships because of that angst and tension. I will say the one thing that kind of held me back from giving this a full 5 stars, even though I really did enjoy it, there was a certain character and character arc that happened throughout this story and throughout this particular book. It felt really random and kind of out of nowhere, and I didn't really understand this character's like motivations and why they were doing what they were doing. So it just didn't really work necessarily. Like I kind of felt myself being a little confused about why that was where things were going and why that character was doing what they were doing. And so it didn't make everything super believable. However, I know Chloe Gong has continued to write books in this world, and I feel like perhaps in those other books we might get some more answers, and I definitely want to continue on and read more from Chloe Gong and like within this world, her books within this world. So I'm hoping that if I read those books, I'll have more of an explanation and a better understanding. But yeah, that was like the one thing that I really didn't love about this. But I did give it 4.5 stars. I really like the characters, love the angst, love the tension, love the relationships and the romance. I love how this ended and wrapped up. And yeah, excited to continue on with more Chloe Gong's books, like I said. And this was definitely a success. And I'm very happy to also check off another series to finish because I've started so many. Also in July, I ended up listening to the audiobook for Loving Color by Bolu Babalola, and this is a short story collection all about romance and different love stories, but it's based off of different like mythology and retellings and folklore, which I thought was really neat. I didn't really know a lot of the inspiration behind some of the short stories, and I still haven't really looked into where the inspiration came from, and I definitely want to do that. I definitely need to do that and find out what stories Bolu Babalola was inspired by, because I really enjoyed this short story collection. I overall gave it 4 stars. I did rate each short story individually, but the average kind of came out to 4 stars, so there definitely were some 5-star ratings for me within this, and there were some like 3. I think the lowest rating I gave was like a 2.5, but that was only one short story. Everything else was 3, 4, and 5 stars. And I'm not a big like short story collection kind of person. I feel like the only ones that I read are about characters and worlds that I've already read from, so like the Shadowhunter short story collections and the Lunar Chronicles one as well. Like I'm already invested in the characters in that world, so it's like reading little short stories. It's not getting exposed and like introduced to a lot of things or new things. It's all things I already know, whereas this, I didn't know anything. Each short story was new characters, new world, new something to learn, and I was surprised with how much I enjoyed it. I loved that there was such a mix of the types of short stories. There were some like more fantastical short stories where she kind of created this whole world and like magic system and all of these things within a short story, which I thought was impressive, but then also had more contemporary type of short stories. There were some like set in our world, and then there were some that were kind of a mix, and I really loved that variety because I feel like I went into each short story not quite knowing exactly what I was going to be getting, and it was really fun to see like what each short story was going to do and where we were going to go with it. And as someone who loves romance, not just like romance books, just like romance in general, a hopeless romantic, if you will, I really enjoyed reading about so many different characters and so many different people finding love. Each short story were characters finding love, and I just thought that that was so much fun to read and was just making me so happy. This was like such a treat to pick up and listen to. I feel like with audiobooks, a lot of times I read them at night or listen to them at night before going to bed. I'll play my silly little phone games and listen to my audiobook. And while I was listening to this audiobook, I was so excited to get into bed and just listen to a short story or two before falling asleep. It was just such an enjoyable listening experience. I also really loved specifically the short story that was about Bolu Babalola's parents. I thought that that was so sweet, and in the audiobook she has her mom narrate a part of the story, which just made it even more emotional. But there were a bunch of other short stories that I loved as well, some characters and stories that have still stuck with me even 2 months after listening to this audiobook. And I feel like sometimes audiobooks I don't have the best memory with. It really depends on what I'm listening to, but some audiobooks just I listen to, I enjoy them, and then all of the details leave my brain immediately. But this is one that stuck with me, and I also really love Bolu Babalola's writing. I read Honey and Spice by her back at the beginning of the year, and I've really enjoyed it, and this was no different. The quotes, the writing itself was just so stunning, and yeah, overall, obviously I've been going on and on about how much I've liked this for a very long time. Great short story collection. Would definitely recommend, especially if you are a big romance reader. I feel like there's got to be some short stories in here for everybody to enjoy. And then the final 2 things that I ended up reading in July were both rereads. So I'm going to kind of go through them quickly because I know I've talked about both of these very extensively on my channel before. And one of the books I reread was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I feel like the description of this book and whatever I say about this book is really just a small piece of what this book is about. You're following January and Gus, who went to college together. They kind of had this rivalry and just like a lot of types of tension between them, but it was very like minimal. I don't know if this book gets pitched as like rivals to lovers. It shouldn't be. But they knew each other in college and like didn't have like the best relationship, I guess, but that's a very small part of it. Now years later, they are both authors and they end up finding out that they are neighbors at the beach houses that they live in. So January like recently moved in to a beach house and Gus is her neighbor, and they end up kind of reconnecting through that, and they both are also really struggling with writer's block. So they decide to swap genres. So Gus typically writes literary fiction, January typically writes romance, so they're going to write the opposite genre and kind of make this bet on who can get a book publishing deal first, who can sell their book first, I should say. And while they do that, Gus is going to help January with research for her literary fiction novel, and January is going to take Gus on these like fun romantic dates to give him inspiration for his romance book. And like I said, that's the description that I always give and also what's on the back of the book, but that really is such a small piece of this book. Like, yes, you see them writing, yes, you see them go on these dates and these research trips, but it's really about their connection and like the different things that they have going on in their lives. January is grieving the loss of her father throughout this book, but there's also a lot of complicated feelings with that because of things that she found out after his passing, and also like why she's in this beach house in the first place. There's just a lot of complicated feelings and things going on with January with all of that, and then Gus also has his own things going on in his own personal life, and the two of them kind of form this relationship. But I just love it so much. I love January and Gus so much. The banter between them is top notch. I was so worried rereading this book that I was not going to enjoy it as much as I did when I read it last year for the first time. But the good news is I still really enjoyed it. It stayed a 5-star for me. I still loved it so much. I just love books that, I mean, it's a weird thing to say, I guess, but when books like tackle and discuss grief, I find it really moving, and I think when it's done well, it can really emotionally impact me like it did with this book. And like I said, I love their banter. I love their relationship. I just love Emily Henry's writing and her humor. It just, everything about her writing really works for me. Like I said, I was worried about this not being as good as I remembered, especially now that I've read her other adult romances, and like Happy Place was her most recent book that I had only read like a couple months before this, and I was like, ooh, I don't know if it's going to stand up now that I've read something that's more recent of hers. Obviously throughout each book she's going to improve and get better, and I definitely like can see that she has improved as an author going back to this book, but I still loved it even though I know she has improved, and I think this is still really good. Like I said, the banter, the relationships, the kind of difficult topics and discussions that are handled in this book, and just the relationship itself. I just love it. I know I've talked about it so many times, so you all know at this point that I love this book. Like I said, it was one of my favorite books of last year, so I know I haven't shut up about it pretty much since I read it. So you know how I feel about it. Love it. Love January. Love Gus. Love their relationship. Love everything about this book. Emily Henry can just do no wrong, in my opinion. So this was great, obviously. Such a fun reread. And then the final book that I read in July, like I said, was another reread. I did a reread of Volume 1 of Heartstopper to prepare for the second season of the show. And now we can get into my first few reads of August as well, because I reread the whole series. So, reread Volume 1, 5 stars. Reread Volume 2, 5 stars. Reread Volume 3, 5 stars. And I reread Volume 4. And guess what? It was 5 stars. I just love the series so much. I find it so comforting, and I know a lot of people talk about like how wholesome and cute this series is, and it definitely has those moments for sure. The relationship between not just Nick and Charlie, but the other characters as well, the other like friendships, but also relationships that are happening within their like friendship groups within this book. Like, there are a lot of really sweet moments, and if you do not know what this series is about, I don't know how to hold up all 4 of these books. Can you tell I'm struggling? But if you don't know what this series is about, you're following Nick and Charlie as they fall in love. They meet in school and they start this relationship, but there are some more complicated things happening. We have Nick, who is really coming to terms with his sexuality. He, you know, up until this moment thought that he was straight, so he's really trying to figure himself out and figure out maybe a label that works for him. Also, we have Charlie, who is really dealing with his mental health and struggling with that. So the series definitely has those wholesome moments, but I feel like as it continues on, it does get a little bit more emotional, especially as we touch more on Charlie's mental health. I feel like each volume it gets more and more heavy with that, but it's still, I think Alice Oseman does such a good job of keeping it relatively lighthearted. I feel like the tone, it's not completely different from volume to volume. It does still have a bit of lightness to it, but it definitely isn't all wholesome all the time. But yeah, obviously I love this series so much. It's such a comfort series for me. It means a lot to me. These characters and these friendship groups and these relationships are just so sweet to read about, and I was so excited to do a reread of them because I think up until like this most recent reread, I had only ever reread volume 1, so it was really fun to revisit all of the volumes and also watch season 2 of the show. Yeah, it was such a fun way to prepare for the new season, and I had a great time. Cried a lot, but it was really fun. So yeah, reread all 4 volumes of Heartstopper and had a great time. But yes, like I said, we've transitioned into my August reads, the books I read in August, and most of these were for the Magical Readathon. There were a couple of things that weren't for the readathon, but most things I read for that, and I had such a good time with it. I don't know why I'm just holding my Stanley. I keep coughing a lot in between every sentence pretty much that I'm saying, so I'm just keeping it on deck. But yeah, the Magical Readathon, as always, was so much fun. I've done it, I think, almost every year that it's been happening while I've been on YouTube, so it's such a fun thing to participate in every year, and I really enjoy it. I think G is just a genius, and so much credit to her for what she has created with this readathon. And I did end up counting a couple volumes of Heartstopper for the Magical Readathon, but after that, one of the first things I read for the readathon was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is the companion sequel, sort of, to Part of Your World, which I also read this year a few months ago and really enjoyed. And this is following Brianna, who is the main character from Part of Your World's like best friend. So we're following Brianna, who is a doctor, and she works at this hospital that she is kind of expecting to get this promotion. She's kind of like really the only option. She's the best option until a new doctor comes and starts working at this hospital named Jacob. And now he's kind of become her competition for this promotion. So because he is going to potentially be taking this promotion away from her, and they also just like didn't have the best like first impressions of one another. They didn't get off on the right foot. I feel like I say that every time and that doesn't sound like the right expression. But basically they didn't have the best first impressions of each other, and so she's kind of determined to hate him, but then he ends up doing something very sweet, kind of flips the tables. He ends up writing her a letter kind of describing what was happening in his mind in that first interaction that they had. Jacob has anxiety, and so that can kind of influence his interactions with people and how he handles certain things, and that is kind of what he was describing to her in his letter. And I will say the anxiety representation in this book meant so much to me. I feel like Jacob and like how he describes his anxiety, how it manifests, and also kind of how he copes with it and how he like makes his life a little bit easier to like get through these things that make him anxious. Like it is exactly what happens with me. Like there were just so many things I was like, wow, this was directly taken from my brain and from my life. So I really love that aspect. But then after he writes this first initial letter, she writes him back, and they kind of start writing these letters back and forth. There's also some other things going on as well. Brianna's brother is in need of a kidney donor, and Jacob ends up getting tested to see if he is a possible match for her brother, kind of without her knowing. But then also he's recently gone through a breakup and his family's concerned for him, so he lies and says he has a girlfriend, and then he ends up having Brianna fake date him to make his family kind of back off a little bit. So there's fake dating as well, which is one of my favorite tropes. So yeah, this was a romance that kind of just checked off every single box I could ever want within a romance. It had really great characters, lovable characters on their own, but also together. The banter was really great, the humor, the writing, everything about it I just really loved. The mental health representation, the emotional family relationships, both with Brianna and her brother, but also Jacob's relationship with his family as well was really interesting to see. Yeah, I don't know. I loved everything about this. Like I said, it had fake dating as well, which is one of my favorite tropes. I thought it was done really well. And this is definitely like one of my favorite books of this year. It may be in the top 3, which is kind of wild. I will say it doesn't have a whole lot of competition. I've had such like a mediocre reading year. Like I've liked a lot of things I've been reading, but there haven't been a whole lot of like highlights, standouts, new all-time favorites. But I definitely think that this is a new favorite for me. Definitely in my top 3 of the year. I loved it so much. I just really loved their relationship. I loved seeing the like banter between them and the lighthearted moments, but also how they were able to kind of be there for each other and help each other through things. So Jacob's anxiety, there are certain things that he would kind of do to make things easier for himself. He didn't like going to new places. If he did, he like a restaurant or something, he would always look at the menu before going, which is what I do. And Brianna would be like, hey, we could go here, and would like send him the menu beforehand. Or like if he was driving to a new place to meet her, she would send him a place on where he could park. Just like doing certain things that she knew would help him and his anxious mind. And I just thought that that was so sweet. And then also Brianna has also gotten out of a relationship that was really difficult for her, and there was a lot of, I think, trauma from that on her end, and the way Jacob was there for her through that as well. I just thought that they were really great together, but also I just loved them individually. I just loved everything about this book. Plus he has a dog, so like, dream man. But yeah, I absolutely love this. If I have not made it clear, I really enjoy Abby Jimenez's writing. Sometimes I find it a bit like cringy or sometimes cheesy, but I also laughed out loud reading this book. I also sobbed, and I also was like squealing and kicking my feet because of the romance. So like that like cringy moments kind of get outweighed by the fact that this also just makes me feel so much. Her writing does make me feel a lot of emotions, so I don't even really pay that much attention to it. Plus I love a good cheesy moment sometimes. So I just love her writing. I love the characters. I loved the romance and the plot and the emotional moments. It was just, everything about it was so perfect. So I absolutely loved this. I gave it 5 stars, and like I said, definitely one of my favorite books that I've read this year. The next book I ended up finishing in August was These Violent Delights by Micah Nemerever. I actually think I started listening to the audiobook for this back in July and then finally finished it in August. But this is a book that I don't even really know how to describe it. It's very much a character-focused book. There really isn't much of a plot. You're following these characters, Paul and Julian, and they become friends and meet in college, and they form this friendship and then this relationship and then this obsession with each other. Really, I just think this book is an exploration of obsession and how far these two are willing to go for one another. And I thought this was going to be more of a thriller than it was. It definitely has like some thrilling things happening, but a lot of it happens like off page and you get it described to you afterwards. So it definitely isn't a thriller. I'm not really sure what I expected going into this book. I don't think that this was a book for me. I gave this 3 stars. I really just don't have a whole lot of thoughts about it. I thought some of the discussions on, you know, obsession and just like what these characters were willing to do was interesting, and I did like the ending. I thought that that was interesting as well. How many times am I going to say interesting? I don't know. I just don't really have a lot of thoughts, to be honest with you. It wasn't really what I expected, but also I don't think that this was necessarily a book that is for me. Like I said, I gave it 3 stars, which feels kind of generous considering how much I just didn't really enjoy this book or just didn't really care, but also because I felt so like neutral on it. I was like, a 2 star feels really low. I don't know. Wasn't for me. I'm sure there is an audience for this. A lot of people do really enjoy this book. It just was not something that I think was written for me as the intended audience. The next book I ended up picking up, I finally read A Man Called Uwe by Fredrik Backman. This is a book that I've owned for a couple years but have wanted to read for much longer than that, but I've just been so intimidated by it because I knew it was gonna make me sob, and I was right. In this book, you're following a man called Uwe who is a grumpy old man. He's not even that old. It says at the beginning of the book that he's 59, which is not that old. I thought he was gonna be like in his 70s or 80s, but I digress. That's not the point. He is this grumpy older gentleman who is just not thriving. He's had a lot of things in his life that have led him to be this grumpy man, and there are a lot of things recently that he's really struggling with. But one day, this family moves in next door and become his neighbors, and he kind of forms this unlikely friendship with him, and then eventually other people in the neighborhood as well. So throughout this book, you do learn why Uwe is... Oh, hi, Sam. I don't know if you heard that meow. But hello, I'm just trying to speak. Thank you. You learn why he is grumpy, you learn why he is the way that he is, but you also see that there is more to him and that he does care, and it's just a very like heartwarming, emotional read. This is the second book I've read by Fredrik Backman, so I don't know if this is like a common theme throughout his book, but both of the books I've read from him, this one and Anxious People, I feel like the human connection, the relationships that people make and those bonds and the strength of them and how important that is really, I feel like, the center of both of the books I've read from him. him. And I love that. I love reading books about the human connection and why these relationships and friendships are so important in people's lives and how much of an impact that can have on people. And that is definitely like the very center of the conversation within this book. I will say I did give this book 4 stars. A part of it is just because it didn't give me 5-star feelings. I did really like it. I did sob reading the end of this book, like uncontrollably. And it was very emotional, and I think it is a story that will stick with me. I think just like the conversations and the morals and, like I said, the discussions on these relationships and friendships and how important they are in people's lives, I think is just a subject that I find really emotional and very touching, and I do like reading about, but it just didn't have those 5-star feelings. And also, more importantly, the fat phobic comments that just kind of go unchallenged throughout this book, not cute. Didn't love that. So that's another reason why this was not 5 stars for me, but I did really enjoy it still. And I just really enjoy Fredrik Backman's writing. I feel like it's very unique, and just the way he's able to describe, again, human feelings and emotions and connections feels really unique and very much like impacts me. And I still think about anxious people, even though I read that a couple years ago, and I think it's going to be the same thing with this book. It's going to be just a story and characters and emotions and feelings that stick with me for a while. So very happy I finally read this. I was scared of sobbing, but it happened, and I lived. And I'm really happy that I did end up enjoying it in the end. Next up in August, I ended up reading The Lost Sisters by Holly Black. This is a very quick, like 50-page novella set in the Cruel Prince world. It is recommended to read it between books 1 and 2, and I did read book 1, The Cruel Prince, last year, so this is a good refresher on what happened in The Cruel Prince, because I do want to continue on with the series, but I kind of forgot what happened in the first book. So this is basically book 1 of the series through Taryn's perspective, and Taryn is the twin sister to Jude, who is the main character throughout the series. And in this series, you're following Jude, like I said, she is the main character, and you follow her and her sisters. At the beginning of the story, they are taken to Fairy, and they are growing up in Fairy as humans. And really, they just want to be a part of Fairy. They are humans, so they are kind of set apart from everybody else because they aren't fairies, they are humans, but they really want to be a part of this world. So the first book is Jude trying to find her place within the Fae lands, and there is a cruel prince named Cardin who makes things very difficult for her. There's a lot of political aspects to this book. There's a bit of romance, but it's really mostly about the kind of politics. I feel like the relationship between Jude and Cardin really gets hyped up, which is fair. It is fun, and I've only read the first book, so like I'm sure it gets even more fun throughout the rest of the series, but like it definitely is more based on the politics within the world and the different relationships between characters, not just romantic relationships, just the kind of the political relationships that kind of get built. Yeah, I don't know. I did enjoy the first book, and this little novella, like I said, is Taryn's perspective. So it's her perspective of the first book, kind of the events of the first book through her eyes and her motivations and what she was kind of doing behind the scenes. And it was interesting to learn that because Taryn in the first book, she does some things I'm like, girl, what are we doing? Okay, I've just quickly switched over to my phone because my camera battery keeps dying. And I just want to be done filming this video. I want to be horizontal. Sick Lisa is she's not doing well. So we're gonna wrap this up. I think just continuing to film on my phone. But anyway, like I was saying, oh shoot, what was I saying? I was in the middle of talking about the Lost Sisters, right? Yeah, I think I was saying I don't like Taryn. I don't like her character, but it was interesting to see what was going on in her head and like behind the scenes that Jude wasn't seeing in the first book. So yeah, it was interesting to see Taryn's perspective, but I still don't like her. And I did like the way this was written. It was almost like a letter to Jude, and I thought that was really cool. So I did like this. I gave it 3 stars. It's not anything amazing, but it was interesting to get Taryn's perspective and get that refresher on what happened in the Cruel Prince, so that I can hopefully continue on with the rest of the series soon. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was anything amazing. You definitely don't have to read this to read the Cruel Prince series, but it was a fun little added bonus. It was interesting to get Taryn's perspective, but it was just fine. It was interesting, but nothing amazing. Why do I feel like my phone is going to be better quality than my camera that I've been using? Is this going to be a moment of realization that I should just film on my phone? Anyway, next up, let's chat about the book that I started reading back in July and then finally finished. It was like beginning of July and finally finished at the end of August. 9 of Swords by Brooklyn Quintana. I feel like I have talked to death about this book, but I'm happy to do it again. This is a self-published debut novel, so of course I'm excited to share it and talk about it a lot. I'm very happy that this is the book that I feel like took me a while to read and I talked about it so much because I did end up really enjoying this. In this book, you're following a character named Phineas Fogg, but he goes by Finn, and he starts attending this military academy. It's set in this castle, it's in like the middle of a jungle, it's pretty isolated, and a bunch of kids around his age attend this military academy. And this school is kind of a bit dangerous because it's so isolated, because it's in the middle of a jungle, and this is a fantastical world. There's lots of creatures and some scary things that will trick these students and kind of bring them into the jungle and kind of mess with them, and there's just a lot of dangerous situations that these characters get into. So while they're at this school, while they're training at this military academy, and while they're trying to stay alive, they're trying to make it to the end of their school year to compete in these games. And these games are kind of really testing their knowledge and making sure that they are learning what they're supposed to be learning at the military academy, but also it's kind of what determines where they're going to be put at the end of the year. There are like different, my brain wants to use the word houses, I guess that's what it would be, different like groups of people within this academy, different, what is the word I'm looking for? Factions within the military, I guess would be a good way, different like categories of what people focus on, and the games are where you kind of get that determined. There's kind of like a judgment on how well you're doing and where you should be serving. But like I said, there is a fantastical world, so there's lots of creatures and magical things happening, and Finn is really learning a lot about that within this first book. He really didn't know much about it. He didn't think a lot of these things were even real before he went to the academy. Plus there's a lot of like political things going on in the background. Finn is actually a prince, and so he's heavily involved in the kind of political aspect of this book, but he also is only 12 years old. So there's a lot he doesn't know about, and there's a lot of things that kind of he is not aware of that's happening, and there are a lot of things that he's finding out within the politics and with all of these other characters who may or may not want the best or not for him. Does that make sense? I don't know. Can you tell I want to be done filming? No, I'm doing great. This is fun. I'm having a good time. I just feel like wrap-ups are really rough for me. But anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I had such a good time with it. I really loved the castle military academy setting. I just love a castle in general, but I also love any sort of academic setting, especially if it's in a fantasy novel. I don't know. I love a military academy or reading about it. I love reading about, I guess, like magical schools as well. I just love that type of setting. I think it's really fun to read, especially when these characters are in near-death situations like all the time. It makes it very exciting. You never know what they're gonna get into. There's also a lot of really great characters within this book. Finn makes a lot of friends at this academy, and seeing these friendships blossom throughout the school year and throughout this book was really fun to read. I really liked a lot of the side characters, and even the side characters I didn't like, it was interesting still to read about them and read about Finn's like interactions with them. And there's also some really lovable and fun teachers, and I do think like the political aspects of this book are really interesting. Like I said, Finn doesn't know too much about what is going on because he's so young and he's also away at this school, so he's not really exposed to it too much. But I think going forward in the rest of the series, the political aspect is going to become even more at the forefront, and I'm very interested to see where that goes and learn more about it because I think it's really interesting. I don't know if I've said what I rated this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I feel like the reason I had to knock off star rating was the pacing of this book. It was really slow at the beginning, which I understand. There were a lot of things that had to be set up, the characters, the politics, certain significant events that needed to happen to Finn and around Finn in order to shape where the rest of the book was going to go. So I understand that a lot of those things needed to happen and we needed that setup, but it just did take a really long time to get into the story. It took about 150 pages for Finn to even start to travel to the military academy, which is like the whole main purpose of this book. Like that's the main plot, so it just takes a while to get into it. I also think within the first half, like how we got certain information and just like the way the story went, it was very much like, here's the information you need to know and that's what we're gonna do. It was just very choppy, I guess. Like it just didn't flow very well. But then in the second half, I feel like, okay, we had the information, we had the foundation, and now we're able to continue on expanding this world and expanding these characters and their relationships while also still having that foundation of knowledge we had in the first half. So I definitely think the second half was a lot more enjoyable. I think more was going on in the plot in the second half, and everything that we learned in the first half was like, I think just flowing together and meshing better with what was happening with the characters and the plot and everything in the second half. So I had some issues with the pacing, but really that was my only issue. There were some moments where it was also very repetitive. There's a lot of training moments with these characters, and we would get every single fight between all of the characters described to us every single time that they were in this class. So it was just like kind of repetitive. And I was like, I feel like we don't need to be seeing this described as many times as we are, but it was interesting to see those scenes. I definitely would have been disappointed if we didn't see any training scenes, but I think it was like we almost had too many. It was too many that were described. So I think maybe a little bit less of that I also would have appreciated. But yeah, other than those couple of things, I did really enjoy this and I had such a good time with it, which I'm really happy about because it did take me so long to read that I'm glad that whenever I did pick it up, I was enjoying my time. It was a really fun world to be in for so long. The reason it took me so long was not to do with the book. It was because I was in a reading slump most of July when I started it, and then the magical readathon was happening in August, so I was focusing on that TBR. It just wasn't the thing that I was like actively reading a lot of the time, so it just took me a while, but it was enjoyable to be in this world and with these characters for as long as I was, and I'm very excited to get into the sequel. The next book I ended up finishing in August was How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I still don't know if this is categorized as a short story collection, but it kind of reads like one because each chapter you're following different characters as this pandemic kind of takes over the world. This book is spanning like 100 years, and it's really seeing how this virus and how this pandemic and how people handle it, how that evolves over 100 years. And I thought this was really, really interesting. It was really interesting to see how people coped, the careers that kind of were created from this, how like the technology evolved over the hundreds of years, how the virus evolved, what we learned about it. All of those things I thought was really interesting to read about. It definitely was hard to read at certain points just because, you know, we've gone through our own pandemic in recent times, and it was kind of weird to read about it. It was very different from COVID, so at least there's that, but it was still a bit weird to read. It was still really interesting to see how humanity handled this situation, especially because I feel like in some aspects the book, how humans decided to handle it was kind of different from how like COVID was handled. But yeah, I don't know, it was just a very like emotional read at points. Obviously when you're reading about a pandemic and a virus where people are dying, it's very emotional to read. I feel like I've talked about this every time I've talked about this book, but there is a specific story, a specific chapter that focuses on this amusement park that was created for children who come in contact with this virus and are dying, and it's a place that they can go on their last day as like a final day of fun. And it was just so emotional to read. Like I've said, I think that that is going to stick with me forever. There are just certain short stories within this book, certain chapters, certain characters I feel like really had an impact on me and got me thinking. And I also really liked how, even though a lot of the chapters were following different characters, there were a lot of connections within each of the chapters. So like one chapter you might be following the daughter of a character that we followed in one of the earlier chapters. And a lot of those connections were really important because I do think that like the human connection was such a central part of this book. I think how humans kind of worked together and would come together, or how they didn't, or how they would have to support one another, the relationships that came out of it. There's just so much that this book focused on that had humans and those relationships and those bonds and that connection at the center. And I think having a lot of connections to other characters within all these chapters, even though the stories felt very singular, there were a lot of connections between them, and I think that that really added to the human connection kind of theme. And I don't know, I did really enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if I said that already. I think as the book went on, I didn't love it as much. I did like the final couple of short stories. I thought those were interesting, but yeah, there were a couple that I was like, this wasn't as good, I feel like, as the first few. The first few definitely had more of an impact on me, the first few chapters, but I still really enjoyed it, and I do think that this is the type of book that is going to stick with me for a while. I also don't read a ton of sci-fi, and I don't know why, because I have enjoyed it when I've read it in the past, and I like, one of my favorite shows is Stranger Things, which would we consider that sci-fi? I would. So you would think that I would maybe pick up more sci-fi books, and I definitely think that this introduced me to a lot of, I'm sure, relatively common sci-fi like tropes and things that you see in sci-fi a lot, but I thought were really interesting. So I'm excited to check out more from this author, maybe read some more science fiction within this type of genre. I don't know. We'll see. I did really enjoy this though. Okay, we're almost to the end, which is good because I think I'm losing steam. I don't think I'm speaking about these books very well, so I'm so sorry. But the next book that I ended up finishing in August was Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This is another very character-driven book. There isn't much of a plot. You're following the main character, Casey, who has just recently moved to Massachusetts. New England representation, and yes, I'm going to mention it every single time I talk about this book. But Casey has recently moved into the Boston area. I don't remember if it said exactly where she was. It probably did, I just forget, but Boston-ish. And she is currently working at a restaurant that she doesn't really, like, that is not her dream job. She doesn't want to be there. She's kind of miserable there. She really wants to be a writer, but she's really struggling with that creative part of her life because she has recently lost her mom. Her mom very suddenly and tragically passed, and then she's also just ended a relationship that was very, like, important to her with this guy, and she's just really struggling. And you know, the creative aspect of writing and being an author just is not really where her mind is able to focus. But then throughout this book, she meets these two different guys and she kind of falls for them both at the same time, and she's trying to figure out what kind of path she wants to go on. And as that's happening, she's also trying to really focus on her writing and figure out a career that isn't working at this restaurant, really trying to take back control of her life while also dealing with grief of her mom, but also the relationship she lost before and how those things have impacted her. And also, you know, we see her kind of have some mental health and just like general health issues as well. It's very much just like a slice of life type of book. A slice of life makes it sound more wholesome, I guess, but like it doesn't really have much of a plot. We're just really focusing on this character as she is trying to navigate her, I think she's in her 30s, and trying to figure out what she wants in life and how to pursue that and how to get what she wants. And again, really enjoyed this, gave this 4 stars. I feel like I had a lot of 4 stars in July and August, but this was another 4-star. I really enjoyed it. I really just like reading about characters as they try to figure themselves out, figure out what they want to be doing, figuring out things about themselves, and feeling a little bit lost, I feel like is a very relatable concept to me. So for me to read about characters in a similar-ish position to me, or just be like having similar-ish thoughts, I feel like is comforting in a way. It's nice to know that I'm not the only person that feels so confused and so lost. It just felt very real. I think that's where that kind of slice of life thing that I was talking about, it feels like I just kind of followed this character along for a part of her life, and then that was it. And it just felt like a real person. These were real people that she surrounded herself with, real problems. And yeah, I don't know, it just felt like a very real story. I don't know how many times I'm gonna say real, but I think that is like really important to me when reading about characters like this and reading about stories like this, where characters trying to figure themselves out and figure out their life and what they want. Because it's like most people aren't gonna miraculously have it all solved by the end of a certain time. By the end of a book, a lot of times these characters kind of have it all figured out. And I think Casey, you know, she does figure some things out and she's on track, but it didn't feel like everything was perfect at the end of the book, but she was in a much better position, and it just felt very real and very honest in how life actually is. So I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars, and this was a book I really wanted to read for a while, so very happy I finally did that. All right, we made it to the final book. The final book I read this summer and in August, and that was Bitterblue by Kristin Cashore. This is the 3rd book in the Graceling series, which I've kind of been slowly making my way through over the past like year and a half. I think I read Graceling last March. I think I read it for did I read it for the magical readathon, or like a week-long magical readathon? I think I did. But yes, this is the 3rd book in the series, so I'm not going to talk about what this book is specifically about, but in this world there are these people called Gracelings. Not everyone is a Graceling, but there are certain people who have mismatched colored eyes, and that means that they have a certain power. Every Graceling is unique. All of their powers are unique. And our main character in the 1st book in the series, Graceling, her name is Katza, and her Graceling is that she's able to kill a man with her bare hands. And she is used by her uncle, who is one of the kings in this world, to go around and basically take care of people that he doesn't like or has issues with. Eventually, she kind of sets off on her own adventure and meets a character named Poe, and also meets a character named Bitterblue. And now in the 3rd book, Bitterblue is the main character. I think this is taking place like 10 or so years after the 1st book in the series. So we're seeing Bitterblue a little bit grown up, a little bit older, and how the events of basically the end of Graceling, and also Some Things in Fire as well, which is the 2nd book, how those things are still affecting the world now, and how Bitterblue is choosing to deal with these things. So what I really loved about this book was that we saw a lot of connections to Graceling and Fire, the 1st and 2nd books in the series, because Graceling and Fire feel pretty different from one another. They feel very separate because Fire is taking place 50 years before the events of Graceling. So there are some connections, but it does feel kind of like, you know, there's different characters and not a whole lot of characters you recognize, and very different world, very different things happening, but this book really pulls from both books. You see characters from both books, which is just so much fun, especially as I loved Graceling and Fire so much. So it was really, really fun to see a lot of those things, a lot of inspirations, a lot of characters, a lot of the impacts of both of those stories happening in this book. Unfortunately, I did not love this third book as much as I did the first two. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, and I know I gave the first two 4 stars, which feels it's too low. I need to go and like fix them and raise them to like a 4.5, I think, for both of them, because I do really like the first two. This one didn't love as much. I still enjoyed it. I really liked Bitterblue's character. I do think the politics within this world are very interesting, and a lot of the relationships that these characters have, whether they're like romantic relationships or just friendships, I think are really fun to read about. But for me personally, this book was just a little underwhelming, especially in comparison to the first two. I feel like the plot was just not as interesting. It wasn't as engaging. I feel like I didn't even know where the plot was going for most of this book. It really wasn't clear for a while. I also found that the romance was a little underwhelming as well. Like, it was cute. I liked the love interest, but I just didn't feel as invested in it as I have felt with other relationships in this series prior to this one. This book had the things that I liked from the first two books in it. I just feel like it wasn't as good as those. It just, in comparison, fell a bit flat for me, but I did still enjoy it. Like, it was enjoyable enough to read. Like I said, I like this world, I like the politics, I like the characters, so I still enjoyed reading it, but it definitely didn't stand up to the other two books. It definitely isn't as good, in my opinion, as the first two. But I am happy that I read this book. I'm happy I continued on with the series. I do still have the 4th and 5th ones to read. If anyone knows if Kristin Cashore is done writing books in this series, I'd love to know, because I feel like I haven't been able to find information on it. I don't know if this series has officially wrapped up or not, but if you know, let me know. But I still have books 4 and 5 to read, which I'm very excited about, especially because this was kind of the original conclusion to the series, which I do think as a conclusion, this was really good. I think because it did connect to the first two books so well, that I do think that this was a good conclusion to the original trilogy. But I am interested to see what happens in the 4th and 5th books, because those are the ones that she wrote, you know, years after finishing this original series. So I'm interested to see how I feel about them, and also some of the things that I think left me feeling unsatisfied about this book. See if we get any more of that in the 4th and 5th books and I can feel more satisfied about it. So yeah, happy I read this. Didn't love it as much as the first two, but still had a good time. And that is the final thing that I read in the month of August. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in July and August. I again apologize that this wrap up was a bit of a mess. I feel like I didn't make any sense half the time, and I don't know. I don't know what this is gonna be. Praying for Lisa, who has to edit this and try to make sense of what I'm saying. But like I said back at the very beginning of the video, I did do a lot of vlogs throughout July and August where I read most of, if not all of, these books. So if you're feeling a little confused about my thoughts or wanting a little bit more, especially, you know, because I'm not really making a whole lot of sense, I will have all of those linked in the description. I also apologize again for all the weird lighting things happening, switching to my phone mid-filming. Maybe this was even better than my camera. I feel like the quality on my phone is actually better than my camera, so maybe I should just start filming on my phone. Anyway, not the point. Let me know if you have any thoughts on my camera versus my phone. I'd love to hear them. I would also love to know if you've read any of these books that I chatted about in this video. Any thoughts, anything you want to chat about them down below. Would love to hear it. And I still am coughing in between almost every single sentence, so it's time for me to wrap this up. So yes, that is going to be it for my July and August little summer wrap up. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.